The moment Prince Harry realized he may have become the third person in his own marriage, everything changed, and the cameras may have caught every second of it. The world once watched him flee palace walls in the name of love, freedom, and protection. But now, whispers are growing louder that the prince who escaped one royal nightmare may have walked straight into another. Because in Sydney, behind polished smiles and staged appearances, something looked deeply wrong. And at the center of it all stood one man who was never supposed to matter this much, Marcus Anderson. Years ago, Princess Diana shattered the monarchy with one unforgettable line: "There were three people in this marriage. It was pain disguised as honesty. A woman pushed aside by an invisible presence she could never compete with." Now, in a twist so eerie it feels scripted by fate itself, many believe her youngest son is living through a modern version of the same torment. Only this time, the outsider is not a royal mistress hidden in shadows. He is a polished insider, constantly visible, always near, always included. And Harry? He looked like the one being pushed to the edge. Observers in Sydney noticed the pattern immediately. Meghan Markle and Marcus Anderson moved like a unit, leaning toward each other, sharing quick glances, private jokes, silent understandings. Meanwhile, Harry often stood inches away, but emotionally miles apart. He tugged at his collar, he fiddled with his wedding ring, he stared downward, he chewed mechanically, jaw tight, eyes distant. Those are not the gestures of a relaxed husband enjoying a tour. Those are the signals of a man carrying pressure so heavy it is leaking through his body language. And then came the dinner that insiders cannot stop talking about. What was reportedly meant to be a private romantic evening for Harry and Meghan after brutal press coverage suddenly became something else entirely. Harry arrived expecting intimacy, a chance to reconnect. Instead, Marcus was allegedly already seated at the table, tablet open, documents spread out like a boardroom meeting disguised as dinner. Imagine the silence in Harry's chest at that moment. Imagine expecting your marriage and finding a strategy session. Witnesses said he withdrew into himself, barely speaking, focusing only on his food while Meghan and Marcus handled business. If true, it was not scandal in the traditional sense. It was something colder, emotional displacement. Later that night, reports claimed the silence exploded behind closed doors at the Intercontinental Hotel. Harry allegedly demanded to know why they could never simply be alone. Why every private moment had to include planning, branding, deals, logistics. Why their marriage felt less like a home and more like a company in motion. That question cuts deeper than anger. It reveals fear. Fear that the relationship itself had become secondary. Fear that love was being managed like a schedule. Fear that he no longer recognized the life he built. But Meghan reportedly had an answer ready, and it was brutally practical. Marcus, she is said to have insisted, understood the future. Marcus knew how to build security, wealth, relevance, independence. Marcus was necessary. And in one devastating shift of power, necessity can become more important than affection. Utility can outrank loyalty. Results can silence feelings. If Harry wanted reassurance, he may have received the business case instead. That is where the psychological wound becomes visible. Harry's identity for years was built around protection. Protect Meghan. Defend Meghan. Rescue Meghan from institutions, headlines, enemies, pressures. But what happens when the protector is no longer needed? What happens when strategy replaces sentiment? What happens when another man becomes the trusted mind in the room while the husband becomes the emotional problem to manage? At public events, the contrast only intensified. Cameras captured Meghan and Marcus deep in conversation while Harry hovered nearby like an invited guest unsure where to stand. Every laugh he did not share. Every whisper he could not hear. Every moment he could not enter. Small things become explosive when repeated enough times. Patterns tell stories words try to hide. And perhaps the cruelest layer of all is the symbolism. Harry spent years condemning intrusion, accusing institutions and media of poisoning private life. Yet now the intrusion some claim hurts him most is not from paparazzi or palace courtiers. It may be from someone inside the circle itself, someone with constant access, someone Meghan appears to trust without limits. Someone Harry cannot simply remove without detonating the whole structure around them. Sydney may have looked glamorous from the outside, but inside that polished image, something seemed to fracture. A prince once defined by rebellion now appeared reduced to silence. A husband once fiercely vocal now looked hesitant to speak. And if this was only what the public saw, the real question is terrifying. What was happening when the cameras were off? What happened next may be the moment everything truly collapsed, because the tension that had been simmering in glances, awkward distances, and and forced smiles reportedly exploded in the most public way possible, at a rugby stadium packed with cameras, spectators, and nowhere for humiliation to hide. What should have been a lighthearted appearance became, to many watching closely, a live display of emotional exile. Meghan was seated directly between Prince Harry and Marcus Anderson, but the real barrier was not the chair placement, it was her body language. Throughout the match, she was repeatedly turned toward Marcus, leaning in, whispering, laughing, reacting to him as if they were the only two people in the row. Harry, meanwhile, looked like a man stranded beside his own life. He stared into the distance, tugged at his shirt collar, picked at his clothing, shifted uncomfortably, and repeatedly tried to compose himself while the conversation flowed around him rather than through him. It was not loud drama. It was quieter than that. And quiet humiliation is often the most brutal kind. At one point, reports claim Harry attempted to lean in and join the conversation, only to receive a brief acknowledgement before Meghan pivoted straight back to Marcus. To the casual viewer, it may have looked minor. To anyone who understands relationships, it looked devastating. Public rejection does not need shouting. Sometimes it is a tiny movement, a turned shoulder, a redirected smile, a message sent without a word. Social media immediately reacted, with many describing Harry as a ghost at his own feast. The man who once stood as Meghan's shield now appeared to need one himself. Then came the gestures that intensified every whisper. Marcus was allegedly seen adjusting Meghan's hair, touching her sleeve, leaning close to point things out on the field while she responded warmly. Those are small acts, but in a marriage already under scrutiny, small acts become symbolic explosions. For Harry, who has long battled insecurity, grief, and fears of replacement rooted in childhood trauma, those moments may have landed like psychological shrapnel. His face reportedly hardened into visible resentment, not theatrical rage. Worse, controlled rage, the kind that says a person has reached the edge and knows it. Behind the scenes, insiders claim the atmosphere in the VIP lounge became toxic. Harry reportedly confronted Marcus, questioning why a friend was acting like a stylist, escort, strategist, and near-permanent fixture in spaces that should have belonged to husband and wife. If true, that question was never really about wardrobe or proximity. It was about territory, a role, value, place. And Meghan's alleged response cut even deeper. Rather than soothing Harry's distress, she reportedly framed his concerns as emotional fragility and a failure to understand branding realities. In one stroke, pain was rebranded as weakness. Hurt was reframed as incompetence. That kind of response can break trust faster than betrayal itself. The deeper tragedy is that Harry's nightmare seems soaked in irony. He fled royal systems believing he was choosing freedom, authenticity, privacy, and love. Yet critics now argue he may have traded one hierarchy for another, moving from palace machinery into commercial machinery, where image, monetization, optics, and strategic alliances rule with equal coldness. The titles changed. The pressure did not. And in this version, he appears to hold even less power. Then came the reported disaster of the Best Lifestyle Summit in Sydney, described as a grand statement of independence and influence. Instead, insiders claim the turnout was painfully underwhelming, with empty seats becoming the loudest sound in the room. For Harry, those empty chairs allegedly represented more than a business setback. They were proof that the glossy future sold to him might have been smoke. Reports say he erupted backstage, calling the venture a hollow imitation of royal duty stripped of genuine heart and charity. He allegedly accused Marcus of selling fantasies of Hollywood dominance while dragging them into public embarrassment. Whether every detail is true or not, the symbolism is powerful. The prince finally questioning the kingdom built after he abandoned the one he was born into. He reportedly demanded to know why decisions were made in private walks, closed conversations, and late-night planning sessions without him. Why was the husband the last to know? Why did the strategist have more influence than the spouse? Why did family feel like a corporation where he no longer sat on the board? One alleged line from that confrontation says everything. "We are a family, not a firm." If those words were spoken, they reveal a man realizing too late that love and enterprise had become dangerously entangled. What followed was said to be chilling. Meghan reportedly stayed calm, clinical, focused on pressures, finances, survival, outcomes. Marcus was described as the architect of the future, the one willing to do hard things, while Harry remained trapped in old wounds and grievances. If that was indeed the message, then Harry faced a brutal comparison: emotional history versus practical utility. And in systems driven by results, utility often wins. By the final days in Sydney, witnesses claim the physical gap between them said what words no longer could. Meghan and Marcus moved ahead in synchronized conversation while Harry trailed behind or walked far ahead alone, eyes lowered, detached, detached, almost erased from the frame. It was the image of a man no longer inside the story, merely adjacent to it, a prince reduced to background presence in the life he helped create. That is why this story has gripped so many people. It is not just gossip about famous names. It is the ancient fear of replacement, the terror of watching someone else become the person your partner turns to first, the horror of realizing that losing status in a relationship can happen slowly, politely, publicly. Harry once watched his mother describe a marriage crowded by three. Now the world wonders whether history has curved back with cruel precision. If Sydney exposed anything, it may be this. Crowns can be abandoned, countries can be left behind, fortunes can be chased, but emotional exile can follow anywhere. And if the cameras truly caught the truth, then the most shocking chapter may not be what happened in Australia, but what happened after they went home.